We're faced with countless decisions every single day, and those decisions can actually drain our energy and drain our success. Today, we're going to dive into how your decisions shape your success in your business and your life.
Welcome to Thriving Launch with Louise Congdon and Kamala Chambers, the show for heart-centered entrepreneurs who want it all.
5 days a week, we bring you different segments to inspire you to live a life of freedom. We interview the leading experts in the field of business, health, and love. Be sure to check out Training Tuesdays, where we give you a clear action plan to grow your own business.
How would you like to be able to interview world-class experts, sit down and have chats with people like Jack Canfield, Marianne Williamson, Robert Kiyosaki, Tim Ferriss, you name it? Would you love to interview other people that you really admire and consider to be your heroes? Well, we've created a course for you that teaches you how to podcast, how to set it all up, and how to get going so that you can really have a successful show and you can do it properly. Over at thrivinglaunch.com, we have a podcasting course, and it's there for you, waiting for you to snatch it up. So head on over to thrivinglaunch.com and let me teach you how to podcast the right way. To help us discuss this issue around willpower and energy and how we can really maximize our life, we've brought on Dave Asprey. He's the creator of Bulletproof Coffee. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a nationwide hit. People love it. And there's a reason. Dave has spent hundreds and thousands of dollars and hundreds and thousands of hours trying to understand what makes the body and the brain run at an optimized state so that life is simpler, we can get more out of life, we can live more in our zone of genius, and be happier and ultimately have less stress. One of the things we're going to be discussing on the show is stress and how we're constantly overwhelmed. And when we talk to Dave, we're going to get some really incredible keys and systems so that we're not running in such an overwhelmed state. Dave is a top-level entrepreneur, incredibly respected in the entrepreneur world in Silicon Valley. But on top of that, he's very well respected and acknowledged in the health field as well. So without further ado, let's get started and welcome to the show of Thriving Launch. All right, we are here with Dave Asprey. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Kamala, aren't we excited to get him on the show?
You know, this guy has done some really incredible stuff. Dave, we are so happy that you're here to share with the Thriving Launchers what we're up to, what you're up to, and are you ready to launch?
I'm always ready to launch.
I love it. You know, Dave has done some amazing stuff. And right now, Dave, I want to ask you, you've gone through this incredible journey of losing weight, of hacking your system. How did you do it? And what are some of the most important pieces to doing that?
One of the most important things that I learned in this whole path, and I've spent north of $500,000 over the past 20 years hacking my system. And this year I've really doubled down on that. One of the most important things, though, is willpower and understanding what willpower is. And willpower is a biological resource. It comes from somewhere and it is exhaustible. In the course of my career, I've had a very successful time in Silicon Valley. I was a co-founder of a part of a company that held Google's very first servers when Google was launched. And in fact, most of the big internet companies, you know, today that are 20 years old got started in my company's data centers. And to have had this time in Silicon Valley where I would just push with everything I had using my willpower. And then when I would run out and just feel like I don't have anything else to give, then I'm like, it's because I'm weak. And like, I need to do something about that. And that's actually a recipe for disaster. And what I learned is that there are many ways every single day where your willpower leaks away, and that willpower is a finite resource. You only have so much of it. So it's precious and you can get a little bit more of it. But most importantly, you just stop wasting it.
I'm really curious to hear more from you on what willpower is. Where do you get the motivation? You know, is that, I often ask myself, like, why do I have this crazy drive to get things done every day? And I'd love to hear about what shapes willpower and what you define as willpower.
Well, willpower is measured in psychology now. It's really cool. They have hardcore quantified studies of willpower. And one of the best ways of measuring willpower in animals is kind of mean. You take a rat, you put them in water, and you let them swim until they can't swim anymore, which is really, really mean. And you don't let them drown. You fish them out right when they kind of go under. But that is a very quantified measure. And they also measure something called decision fatigue that's part of willpower. And this is something that really, really affects us as humans, and specifically as humans who run businesses. The number of decisions you make in a day is finite, and it's dependent on the amount of energy and willpower you have. Most people are unaware of the number of decisions they make every day because, unfortunately, the parts of your body that get worn out from making decisions don't really differentiate between deciding what to have for lunch and deciding whether you should buy another company. It's just a decision. And each decision has a certain amount of risk associated with it. And the risk management parts of your body are mostly concerned about whether you're going to starve to death, whether a tiger is going to eat you, and whether you are going to get to have sex to reproduce the species. That's our hardcore wiring. And all of those things get tied into willpower in a way that's mostly invisible to us.
It's pretty wild to think about decision making being a limited conscious thing that we have. A lot of us think we just have this free willpower, we get to choose, but then we have this amount that we're on autopilot. And so then when we're making these new decisions, does that mean we're exhausting the battery, so to speak, even more because it takes more willpower?
It absolutely means that. Some emerging science is really, really interesting here. There's a cool study coming out of Israel. It's one of my favorite ones about willpower. They look in a prison and they're saying, well, what happens if you go in for your parole board hearing? Are you going to get out? The biggest determinant of whether or not you spend another year in jail is what time your appointment is. If you come in at 8:30 or 9 in the morning, you have an 80% chance of getting out of jail. If you come in at 4 in the afternoon, you have an 80% chance of staying in jail. And what's going on there is the parole board has made too many decisions. They ran out of decisions, so they just stopped making them.
Dave, it sounds like we're reading the same books. We recently interviewed Jonah Berger, and he cited a lot of these same studies that you're quoting.
Oh, that's really cool. And that one, though, what if you could, instead of just running out of energy to make those decisions, what if you could actually upgrade the energy so that you had more? And my next book that I'm working on is about mitochondria. And mitochondria are the power plants in our cells, and I've been working on increasing my mitochondrial functions since the late 90s when we really first started understanding mitochondria, because in retrospect, now I understand what happened, but I've had some mitochondrial damage. So my energy production systems are more sensitive than yours. I manage them more closely, but it's given me so much knowledge and the ability to turn them up. What happens if you are having decision fatigue or you're like, I'm just running out of willpower? Well, I can teach you how to use less willpower, which basically means like you're getting better mileage in your car. You can go further because you didn't waste gas with every mile. But there's also ways to sort of refill the tank along the way. And that is a game changer. I use supplements, sometimes breathing exercise, other things like that, in order to increase the number of electrons that you can make in your body. And there's a scene from The Matrix, an old movie, but a very famous one that I'm guessing most listeners have seen at least once. In the movie, when Neo gets in a car, one of the characters looks at him and calls him Copper Top, like you're just a battery. And in the movie, of course, people really wear batteries for these crazy computer things. But really what you really are a battery. At least inside every cell in your body, you have these power plants that act like little tiny batteries. And every thought you have, every decision you make, and every action you take from birth till death is driven by electrons. That's pretty profound because it means if you can be better at using electrons, you will be a better person. And I say you'll be a better person very consciously because when you're better at using electrons, the parts of your brain that use so many of them are actually in a position to regulate your emotions better, and you do fewer things that you're ashamed of later. You actually are a better person when you have more energy, and the decisions you make are better, and you can make more of them before you run out.
I absolutely love what you're talking about. I mean, it kind of sounds like every decision you make can either drain your battery or energize it.
Well, all decisions you make are going to drain the battery, but what if you just made less decisions? I talked about those 3 components that your body is most interested in: making sure you don't starve, making sure you don't get eaten or killed, and then making sure that the species reproduces. Most of your willpower goes towards those things. And That's a sad fact. Your business gets basically the dregs that are left over after you've spent most of your energy every single day worrying about those things, making decisions about those things that you don't even know you're making. And I call that the Labrador brain in The Bulletproof Diet, the book that I wrote that hit the New York Times list. And it's a book about food, but I'm introducing these concepts that are a restatement of a principle called, or a model called the triune brain theory that says there's a reptilian brain, a mammalian brain, and a human brain. And the Labrador brain is this mammal brain, and all it cares about is those three things, and it will redirect your behavior. And if you think about every bad business decision you've ever made, everything you've ever done that you regret came from one of those three things. Is something a threat? That's fear. You procrastinate because of fear. You don't make good decisions because you're worried, because you're afraid. That's avoiding things that might eat you. And then every time you put down an empty pint of Ben & Jerry's and think, God, I'm really a bad person because I just did that, even though you're not a bad person, but people have all sorts of weird guilt around food. Well, you told yourself you weren't going to eat the cookie or eat all the ice cream or whatever it was, and then you did it anyway. Well, some part of you made you do it. It's your Labrador brain. And the very simple principles behind the Bulletproof Diet are, if you just assume that roughly a third of your unconscious willpower drain comes from food, 1/3 comes from fear of random things, and 1/3 comes from fear that the species won't reproduce, therefore you better go get some. What if we could just turn off a third of that using food? And that is what the Bulletproof Diet is all about. When you use bulletproof coffee, which is what I'm best known for, by the way, it's really funny that I'm better known for that. I'm also the first person to ever sell anything over the internet. Like the first example of e-commerce was out of my dorm room before the browser was created.
All I've heard about you is coffee. Like when I think about Dave, I think of this like cup of coffee with fat sitting on top of it.
Well, then it wasn't blended right if there's fat sitting on top. You've got to blend it for it to work.
Well, Luis has never drank coffee, so he wouldn't know what a bulletproof is versus a regular coffee. But maybe he needs to start now that there's bulletproof.
Luis, I was thinking you sounded kind of weak. Now we know why.
I'm a vegan, that's why. No, I'm kidding.
I was a raw vegan for a while too. Actually, a really good raw vegan chef. Unfortunately, I don't think that's biologically compatible with people over 25 very often. But on the coffee front, what happens with that is it's a special kind of coffee bean that doesn't contain toxins that make your cells weak. Most coffee that you can buy, especially in North America today, it contains a toxin from the fermenting process. And it's not commonly talked about, but most governments around the world have strict legal limits, like parts per billion on these toxins. So coffee that's too contaminated with this toxin to legally sell in Japan or even in China or Europe, they send it to the US and Canada and we drink it. And it actually lowers what's called mitochondrial respiration in studies. So it's not going to kill you. It's just going to make you a little bit weaker. That's a problem. So the bulletproof coffee beans are made with a different fermentation-free process, and they're lab tested for 27 toxins that don't have any business in your body, at least not if you want to perform at your best. And that's one of the ingredients of bulletproof coffee. So you brew hot coffee with beans that don't have things that make you weak. Then you blend in grass-fed butter instead of milk. The reason you do that is that coffee is full of all kinds of beneficial compounds. In fact, it's the number one source of antioxidants in the American diet. But if you add milk to it, the antioxidants stick to milk protein, and then you can't use them. So you take the antioxidants and you don't get the benefit when you're making a latte out of it. But if you use butter, which is basically just milk fat, there's very little protein in it. So then you get the benefits of all the plant compounds that are in coffee, and it turns coffee into more of a superfood. And the final kind of secret ingredient that's really about willpower is an oil called brain octane oil. Now, brain octane comes from coconut, but if you envision coconut oil kind of like a weak beer, brain octane is vodka or Everclear. So we take about the top 5% of the oil in coconut oil, and this has special biological properties. It doesn't get stored as fat very easily in the body at all, and it converts to fat-burning energy called ketones very quickly. It turns out that some cells in your brain, they preferentially consume ketones instead of sugar or glucose in the body. So every spiritual tradition or religious tradition that I've ever seen, in some part of it, has a fasting practice where to connect with whatever you're trying to connect with, you fast for some set period of time. And fasting puts this fat burning molecule at higher levels in your body. It usually takes about 3 or 4 days, and suddenly you receive a state of clarity. It's kind of weird though, because you don't have much sugar in your body at all. With Brain Octane, you get the molecules that power your brain, power your mitochondria, those things that power your decisions. They can come from fat or they can come from sugar. But when you use Brain Octane in your bulletproof coffee, you're kind of cheating. You're getting that brain state that comes from fasting, but you don't have to fast. And as hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs will tell you, like, bulletproof coffee is very popular among business owners and Silicon Valley. It was just on Silicon Valley, the show. It's because when you have 2 sources of energy for your brain, that's fat and glucose that's already in your body, you can do more than when you're just running on glucose, like most of us do most of the time. Like, it's a complete game changer.
You know, it's really cool talking to you because I've done raw vegan food. We're actually having Dr. Gabriel Cousins, who has used raw vegan foods as a way to help people basically reverse diabetes. It's really fantastic, the research that he's done. And then I've also done ketogenic diets as well. And I've done fasting. I've done extended periods of fasting and absolutely love the effect of each different types of diet. But each time, almost every single diet that I've come across, there's a point where I go, well, this doesn't seem very practical, or this feels incredibly challenging. And as you spoke about coffee, it really reminded me of the story that they tell in the naturopathic medicine. If you get into it, there's a story that I've heard told amongst that group where a very famous naturopathic, it was like a nature doctor, like, the original when you go back to India and historic time periods. And he tells his students, I want you to go out into the world and find me something that can't be used medicinally. And every student goes, and every student eventually comes back except one. And after quite a long time, way longer than the rest of the students, the one student comes back empty-handed and says, I could not find anything that couldn't be used. I thought about, a rock, or I thought about this and that. And everything that I looked at, I saw that there was something that we could do with it. And as you talked about coffee, for me anyways, it shifted it. And I'll tell you what, we're in Colombia right now, Medellin, Colombia. And this is the one time where I'll take a few sips of coffee because I feel like it's a little bit more organic or less processed here. But even then, I don't drink it that much even here. But I do feel a little bit more of a positive effect when I drink it here. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about your line of coffee and what you're doing with it. And it gives me a respect in how you've decided to look at food and take a look at something like coffee, which is highly commercialized. And then you're just talking about it's like in Japan and other parts of the world, they won't accept it. And then they give it to people in the US. And you're looking at this thing and going, but there's so much goodness and so much benefit. Now, have you noticed for yourself and the people that you work with, and this is almost like an obvious question, but it still needs, for me, it's important. Have you noticed that as people shift their diets and they get clearer, that then they have more energy to exert to, say, maybe their relationship, to their business, to the things that they love, because they're not exhausting themselves as much around food?
That is exactly what happens. And this willpower thing, here's where a huge portion of your willpower goes when you're an entrepreneur, is you're sitting in a meeting and someone brings in, let's say it's 10:30 in the morning. You've probably had a bowl of cereal or some kind of fruit smoothie for breakfast. And now your brain is starting to get a little bit worried because it knows it's running out of fuel because sugar doesn't stick with you very much. Carbs don't stick in the morning. So someone brings in the plate of cookies, or this morning, some bagels, donuts, bran muffins, whatever. And you didn't really want to have a snack, but the voice in your head, the Labrador in your head says, eat the bagel. And then you say no. Guess what that was? That was a decision. And then about 3 seconds later, the voice in your head says, eat the bagel. You say no. And then
that tail is wagging.
Yeah, exactly. And 400 decisions later, all right, I'll just eat half. And then you eat
Or
half.
you look down and find that the bagel is gone, and you say, where'd that bagel go? Oh my God, did I eat it?
Exactly. And like, I wolfed it down, and now, and then for a lot of people, there's like a little bit of like beating yourself up because you thought you were in charge. Well, you were in charge until you ran out of willpower. But now, okay, literally, that happened, and then lunchtime happens. when you eat MSG at lunch and bad fats and other things that trigger sugar cravings. MSG, when they add it without labeling it in restaurants, it increases the average spend by 30% because it makes people crave dessert and extra drinks. So you do that at the end of lunch, like, well, I didn't want to have dessert today because I'm trying to limit my sugar. Oh, but I guess I'll just do it today. You have that same conversation with the Labrador in your head. And the same thing happens when you get the 2 o'clock slump. And by that time, you're not going to be making good decisions anymore.
It's like it's easier to train that dog if you practice making better choices. And then as you make better choices, then you crave better choices.
Well, the problem is that every time you make a choice is another word for decision. If you have to practice this, you're using willpower on practice and on making choices. And by the way, you're right. Knowing the right choices to make is critically important because otherwise you'll use willpower to make choices that consume more willpower. And that's what happened to me when I was on a low-fat diet with exercise 6 days a week for an hour and a half a day. I didn't lose weight. I got strong and I got tired. Amazing how that worked. But I didn't make choices that actually gave me more willpower or more energy. And the whole Bulletproof Diet philosophy is around, here's one-page roadmap. In fact, it's downloadable without buying the book. And you print that out. And like, here are the foods that give you more energy and more willpower. These are the ones that may or may not sap your energy or willpower. And these are the ones that always sap your energy. And if you just kind of have that framework in your head, when you sit down at a restaurant or any other time, you can make a choice. But you make a choice that pays dividends in the form of more energy and more willpower and less weakness so that you have that energy. When you get home at the end of the day, if you burned yourself out on decisions, you wasted your electrons because you ate food that actually caused your mitochondria to perform worse. You didn't use brain octane or intermittent fasting or a ketogenic diet, at least some of the time. You're actually neurologically weaker. And you come home and then your wife or husband or your kids come rushing to you and they want this, they want that, and all that. And then you snap at them. And then you think you're a bad person. Well, the reason you snapped at them is that the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain that consumes the most energy in your brain, it didn't have enough electrons to properly regulate your emotions. And this stuff is all documented. Like, this is science. So then you go, man, I'm a bad person. You beat yourself up and you say, next time I'll try harder. Well, what the hell? Trying harder isn't what it's about. It's supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to take trying and pushing. The reason it's hard is because you didn't have the energy to do it. So you owe it to yourself and you owe it to the people around you. And by the way, if you're an entrepreneur, all of the people who work for you and all the partners and customers that you're responsible for, that's one of the reasons I'm absolutely religious about taking care of my biology. There are hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, there's 35 million downloads on Bulletproof Radio. I've consumed 127 full human lifetimes with content I've created. Like, I'm either a mass murderer or I'm not. And that level of responsibility means my biology better be working and I better have enough energy at the end of the day to be nice to my kids and nice to my wife and to be nice to the people who work for me. And I'll tell you, you give me coffee with mold in it, you give me food additives and chemicals and gluten and bad fats, you know what? I'm kind of a jerk. Like, I don't like myself that way. And I do not treat people as well as I'm capable of. So I owe it to the people around me and I owe it to myself. And I think as entrepreneurs, it's our job to take better care of ourselves because we're role models for people and because we have so much power to change the world around us, much more power than the people who work for us. You're controlling people's lives. Like, you make a decision. Are you going to hire or fire this person? Well, if you make that decision when you have not enough energy in your brain because you ate crappy, and like, these people who work for you have families and all that, like, you have kind of a sacred obligation to put yourself in the driver's seat for your own biology all the time because so many people rely on you to create powerful things for them. At least that's how I see it.
That's really beautifully put. And I think that the point that I'm really taking away from that is that it's our responsibility as thought leaders, as entrepreneurs, to be the best possible version of ourselves because we are the ones out there in the world making the big change. Thriving Launchers, I want to bring another point home that Dave here is talking about. He's talking about decision fatigue. And this really applies to an online business because every time I do market research, I find that every client, like the first thing they say is they're overwhelmed and there's so much going on online. If you think about your regular website versus a sales funnel, people need to know the exact actions that you want them to take. That way you can cut down on decision fatigue for your clients as well. Now, Dave, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about how you apply this into your life.
How I apply, like, which part of it? Just the decision fatigue thing?
Yeah, cutting down on decision fatigue.
I flat out cut every decision possible, and we'll put on more of my entrepreneur hat. Like, I've been an advisor to lots of startups over the last 20 years. I was even on IBM's advisory board and thought quite a lot about how this works. In my own life, I have trained all of my employees to not come to me to solve problems. Like, I'm the CEO. And my job is to lead and it's strategy, and it's to be the voice and face of Bulletproof and to create new content, to talk about things and to synthesize new knowledge. It is incredibly easy for employees to come to the CEO and say, tell me what to do. In fact, as an employee, this is the safest thing you can do, because if the CEO told you to do it and you fail, it's the CEO's fault. It's not your fault. However, most CEOs I've worked with, they all are just used to this. So they're like, okay, it's my job to make decisions. Decision. There's a canned answer that anyone in the company who's ever come to me will hear if they say, Dave, what should I do? And it's this. What do you think? What do you recommend? The people who work for me, I have hired them to think. So they have gone out and spent 3 months studying a problem, understanding the market, looking at what to do. Now, they're invited to come and say, hey, Dave, based on all this analysis and research, this is the conclusion. This is what I want to do. Are you cool with it? Is there something else that we should talk about? Like does this jive? That's a very good use of analysis, but it is an abuse of my decision-making capacity to come to me and ask me to solve a problem for you when I don't have all the information that you had. You have to do your own problem solving if you work for me, and you can talk through your process through with me, but I will not solve your problems for you because my willpower is too expensive. So
that's actually really incredible, and it sounds so empowering for the people that work with you. A lot of times when people work for someone else, they're treated like they're less than, or that they don't have the capacity to figure out the solution, which actually weakens everybody. It weakens a whole system.
We have a very unusual culture at Bulletproof, and I actually hack everyone's brain in the company. Like, I provide neurofeedback. Like, we have a neuroscientist who works with us. We have tens of thousands of dollars of neurofeedback gear, so my employees can learn how to get out of their own ways. And it sounds kind of hard, but it's really terrifying for a lot of people. You know, you grow up where, like, okay, there's someone in charge and they're the one who makes the decisions, and then you execute. And when you turn around and go, no, like, you make a decision. And if it doesn't work, like, it didn't work. So one of the things that we do also is we embrace failure, because if you're going to give people responsibility to push boundaries, sometimes it's not going to work. And instead of, punishing failure, we embrace failure and say, all right, good job. We learned something here. Let's not do that again. And there are times when failure happened because you procrastinated or you didn't do what you said you were going to do. That's very different than you did what you said and it didn't come out the way we thought. So holding people accountable is a challenge there. But to save my willpower for the most important and impactful decisions that serve the greatest good in the largest number of people, I won't waste it by making small decisions in the company or in my life. The other day, actually, this isn't true. This was a couple years ago, because Lana, who's a physician, an emergency room physician, who now runs a fertility coaching practice based on our first book. She's my wife. And she used to text me, do you want lunch at 12 or 12:15? Okay. Like, I'm in the middle of a podcast interview here. You just asked me to waste a decision, didn't you? And what she was really telling me was, hey, Dave, I care about you and I'm taking care of you. But what I would respond to that message I would just say yes. And it would drive her nuts. Now we've got it worked out, and it's on the calendar. So anytime you can avoid a thing like that, Mark Zuckerberg has it right. He wears the same clothes every day. So does Obama. He has two colors of suits, and he has someone else pick out his tie. Those are decisions. You don't waste those.
It's really powerful stuff, and it's exciting for me to hear about that, because I know that, everyone that we talk to, them like Kamala talked about earlier, is everybody in the world seems to be exhausted. Everybody seems to have too much on their plate. And you've really empowered us to think about taking more stuff off their plate. One of my friends, he's a coach to mostly billionaires. He's a multimillionaire himself. And one of the things that he says is build a team around you and try to unload as much responsibility on them, but not so much that they're responsible, but that they're responsible for their zone of genius. So he doesn't have to think about some of the other things, and he can focus on his 2 or 3% areas of genius, and everyone else is focused in their percentage of zone of genius. That's really powerful stuff. Now, here's something, I want to wrap it up with this, because I want to give people an opportunity that I feel is really important to me, and that's creating community. The best thing that I've found in regards, and again, going back to spirituality, since you talked about it, every walk of spirituality talks about, Christians gather with other Christians, and in yogic tradition, Sangha, that's in Buddhism as well, as gather with people that are like-minded so that we can reinforce and create a community that really supports the way that we want to live and have daily reminders. Now, do you have ways that people can get into this community and live like this? Because you're talking about something that's kind of strange. I mean, Dave, you're an empowering guy, but this is a strange way to live. How can people be empowered to live in this way more?
I don't want to sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I have 500,000 words of content, 300 episodes of Bulletproof Radio, and I ask every guest in the show a pretty similar question. So I would say start with reading the Bulletproof Diet. You might consider the Bulletproof Conference every year. We have thousands of people who show up in a community to play with the toys and to talk about having control of their biology. But finding friends is the biggest thing to do.
Absolutely love it. We're absolutely going to connect our community to your community through Thriving Launch, and make sure to put all the resources that you talked about, including your book and links to your conference, on that page as well. Also, this has just been so illuminating to look at decision-making as a form of currency and how much we're spending every single day. Thank you so much for being on the Thriving Launch podcast. Thriving Launchers, keep it up.
You've been listening to the Thriving Launch podcast. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure to head over to thrivinglaunch.com. We'll see you there.
If you'd like to have a long-lasting relationship and be happy in your relationship, then you're going to love our next episode with Dr. Stan Tatkin. Be sure to tune in, where we discuss how to create safety in your relationship, the keys to success, and what it takes to have a long-lasting relationship that is full of joy and full of love.